All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending what part of the world you are joining us from. I am Alex Faust, your host of Conversations at the Edge, and very grateful to be back for the second time this week with a brand new guest, Gina Mollicone-Long, who, if you're not familiar with her work, helps people get what they want. She's an international best-selling author, compelling speaker, and peak performance coach with a mission to reveal greatness in individuals, teams, and organizations. She's the co-founder of the Greatness Group, a global team building and personal development company. And since 1998, she has trained, coached, or spoken to tens of thousands of people on 6 continents. She has 2 books, Think or Sink, and The Secret of Successful Failing, which are widely read and enjoyed by people around the world. And she can show you exactly how to get out of your own way. And she's one of our newest thought leaders at Growth Institute. Her course will be live early next month for you all to watch and achieve peak performance for yourself and for your teams. So Gina, welcome to Conversations at the Edge. And where are you calling in from today?
Today I'm in Whistler.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you here, waving from sunny Philadelphia today. And as a peak performance expert, I'm curious how you define peak performance.
So it's funny when I was thinking about this, basically peak performance is whatever is just slightly out of your grasp at that particular point in time. So it's not a static place that you get to, it's a moving target, right? And one of the things to consider, life kind of goes like this. Sometimes when you feel like you're in the down cycle, you can think about the fact that this down cycle is probably still higher than a peak 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so, when I was trying to define this, I discovered that the Greek word acme means peak or highest point. And I don't know if you've ever hiked or done anything like that, but one of the things I always jokingly say is when we get to the peak, when we're hiking, if you look in the distance, there's always another peak and it's always higher, right? And so it's this idea of pushing past where you currently are to the next thing in your reach, getting there, and then noticing there's another one in the distance.
Thank you. So just a reminder for the folks who are here live, if you have questions throughout the conversation today, feel free to post them into the chat, and the last 10 minutes are for you. So I'll make sure that Gina gets to your questions. So it's interesting, Gina. I'm curious, if there's always another peak in the distance, how are you recommending that leaders kind of like enjoy the journey, relish in the wins of, that moment in time of peak performance when it's actually achieved before you're chasing the next peak?
Well, so 2 things to think about there. One is my undergraduate degree is in engineering. And so part of what makes what I do a little bit different than other people is I've tried to turn performance into a process. And I know how much coaches love processes and templates. And so if you can get good at the process, then you're more likely to be able to enjoy the journey because the process of achieving that peak, whatever is the next peak, should be the same every time. The content will obviously be different every time, but the process itself should be the same. And so then it's just a matter of optimizing the process. And when you get to the peak, you sort of have your little celebration, however you do that, and enjoy that plateau till you are compelled. And usually it's desire. That's the indication it's time to start moving again. So a desire for something else is sort of like when you say goodbye to the last peak and move on to the next peak. But there's no sort of set thing, but the process, what you'll notice if you are really meticulous and take out all the content, is the process is always the same. And it really does start with a desire for something new.
So let's talk a little bit more about the process. Your process is called the ACME method or ACME process. Can you give us the 10,000 foot view of how it works?
Yeah, sure. So the ACME coaching framework is, first of all, it's not another coaching program. It's meant to enhance all performance, all coaching. So all coaches, regardless of whether they're business coaches, sport coaches, health coaches, doesn't matter. Their job.
Gina, I also want to clarify, like coaches could be leaders in an organization who are coaching their teams.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. So anybody who's in the process of assisting other people to get the most out of whatever they're doing, which oftentimes is someone in an organization that doesn't call themselves a coach, right? They're still trying to get other people to perform at their peak. What they don't realize is that it's all kind of the same thing. So ACME means Greek word for peak performance. We turned it into an acronym called Accelerated Change Mechanisms of Excellence, because all increased performance is essentially change. What you're trying to do is change one state to the next, right? Whether you call yourself a coach or you're the leader of a team, what you're trying to do is get, X% growth or whatever you're trying to do. And that's change from where you are. But very few leaders, very few coaches understand the process of change itself. So what we did was we created mechanisms to help people understand how to navigate what they're actually doing, which is changing, versus the minutia of what they're doing, which is particular to their industry, their company, or whatever type of coaching they might do, right? All of that is particular, but the processes are the same across the board. And it doesn't matter if you're a hard up business coach, like a straight up business coach, or a business leader, or even a sport coach or whatever. It's all, even the head of a family, right? Somebody who's leading a household is executing the same things, which is getting us from where we are to where we want to be. So we develop.
So, if it starts with change, most people claim to like change, but when change is happening, it's very uncomfortable. So how do you get past that barrier of discomfort to begin and start moving towards change?
So I like to call it how it is. I mean, we don't know each other very well, but we've probably recommended by someone who does know me well. And I call it like it is. So here's the thing. When you're in the comfort zone, so one of the first mechanisms we have 7 mechanisms, right? The first one is called the process of change. And in the process of change, it sort of starts out, you're in the comfort zone. And what initiates movement out of the comfort zone is a desire, right? I want to reach for something else. Now, here's what people need to get, and it's very blunt. The minute you step into that desire, you step out of your comfort zone. By definition, you will be uncomfortable, because that's the definition. The comfort zone is where you're comfortable, and everything outside of this boundary is discomfort. So straight out of the gate, what I say to my private clients or students or coaches or whatever, just accept the fact you're going to be uncomfortable. But would you be willing to be uncomfortable if it meant that at some point you would develop the skills and coping mechanisms, strategies, and whatnot to have the thing you want? Most people would say, yes, I would be willing to endure this discomfort. Think about hiking up a mountain. I use that metaphor a lot. I mean, hiking up a mountain, sometimes I'm thinking, oh my God, my legs are burning. I'm so uncomfortable. Well, why do we keep doing it? Because the payout at the top is worth it. And when you stand up there and look out over the mountains or the lakes or whatever you're there for, it was worth it. So you trade off. Like, you can stay in your comfort zone. I want to be crystal clear. This is not a better than, worse than situation. There's nothing wrong with living life in your comfort zone. I'm not the comfort police, but I don't think the people listening to this webinar, watching this, would be those people. So you're going to have to endure the discomfort that comes from moving from one place to the next.
So we move from comfort zone to desire to change. After that, do we go back to the comfort zone, or where do we go from desire?
Some people do, because they're impatient. They don't, and maybe they didn't watch this podcast, and so they're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. Maybe I should go back to the way it was. Lots of people do that. We all have a level of discomfort we're willing to withstand before we try to scramble backwards. But if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always had. So if you get to the point where you're like, this is as uncomfortable as I'm willing to be because that's how I've always done it, and you try to scramble backwards, then you're not likely to break through. And so Winston Churchill said something fascinating, and I've probably attached myself to this more than any other quote. And he said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Now, hell would be defined as a period of, I would imagine hell is somewhat uncomfortable. So if you're going through hell, keep going, he said. And I thought that's really interesting, because if you persevere, through the discomfort, eventually you'll break through. And I know that for sure. It's not me being a Pollyanna. You don't have the desire for something more unless you already have the base material. Like, unless you already have the components of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you won't have the desire. And I've often in my learning suite, I use the story of a baby learning to walk, right? Babies don't have the desire to learn to walk until they're neurologically ready. So that's why it's not a set age. And so we don't have the desire for whatever is the next thing on our list until we're ready, till we have the components. But what we don't have is the sequence. And so that period of once you have the desire and you're in this discomfort zone that I lovingly nicknamed hell, you're looking for the sequence. And that is where expertise, coaching, leadership, experience plays in, because if someone's ever done it before, they might have a template. And that's how you accelerate that endurance of discomfort, right? You shorten the discomfort by using a model that already works. Get to the breakthrough, and then you have the sequence, right?
Is the breakthrough the point where you stood up, or it happened for the first time?
First 3 steps, the first time. But as I say with the baby, you're not going to take that baby who just took 3 steps on their own and plop them in the busiest intersection in your town, right? So when you achieve something the first time, absolutely, like don't downplay it. It's a huge deal when you solve the Rubik's Cube the first time. But now the goal is to operate there like regular, like your new comfort zone. And that's the sort of repetitive, repeating the same sequence over and over again until you can't not do it that way. It's wax on, wax off for people who have seen the Karate Kid, until it's the dominant pattern. Once it's the dominant pattern, then you are truly in a new comfort zone, right? That's when you can, maybe crack a bottle or whatever. But the people that tend to watch your podcast, the minute they get there and it's sort of, I don't want to say boring, but easy, they're now looking for the next one, right? Because that's how we are designed. We're designed to continuously seek the next peak.
What would happen if, you try and seek the next peak before you've kind of mastered? I'm just thinking, like, right now I'm training a puppy. And so we're working on eye contact, right? And like, if I try and get him to drop the leash or something else without him looking at me in the eyes and without him really getting that, I'm totally at a loss. So what happens for leaders and coaches who are trying to get people to that peak and we're maybe jumping to the next desire too soon?
You bring up a very interesting point. I mean, the easy answer is that it's about the complexity of the nervous system, right? It depends how many balls well, in this case, the puppy, but it depends how many multitasking things they can handle at once. But I will say this: if you build a solid foundation, then it will enable you to better navigate the complexity of life as it comes at you. And what I mean by this is, this goes back to what I said at the beginning, that the content of what you're trying to do in life, achieve more and more, the content changes. It changes from year to year, from quarter to quarter, from company to company, from person to person. But what's the same is the process you have to go through. And if you become familiar, comfortable, mastered of the process, you're less dependent on the content being so perfectly cut and dried, to which then you can handle more and more. Does that make sense? So what we call it in our classroom is, we don't say it's better than or less than or evolved or whatever. We say complexity of thinking. The more complexity of thinking you have, the more you can handle complex situations.
Okay. I think I get that. If I'm cooking something in the kitchen, in the beginning, maybe I can only make one omelet at a time, but then I get better at it. I can make an omelet. I can, do some beans, and I could be making bacon all at the same time, and nothing's going to burn.
You just described my yesterday. But this is important when it comes to corporations, companies, like structures like that, because company, like in a company, they talk about their people like levels of management, and everyone assumes that if you're in a, say, an executive level or whatever, you are a better performer than, say, someone in the entry level, just as an example. I mean, I worked at Procter & Gamble a million years ago, and that was the structure. But when we work with a company, we look at complexity of thinking. So we're looking for different markers, and we only see 3 bands of complexity in a company, regardless of its structure. So the least capable of complex thinking are people at the entry level who really can only do the job. They can do it well, it's functional. Then the next complexity of thinking is people who manage humans. So the first level of complexity is sort of people who manage things, right? Jobs, functions, widgets, whatever. The next level is anybody who manages a human being, okay? Now it can be a manager, a leader, whatever they're called. They need to know something about how humans work. They need to know it above the functionality of the company. And very few people have that complexity of thinking training. The final layer we look for is leaders of leaders. So not only do they need to understand the complexity of human beings, but they need to understand the complexity of leading human beings. Now, if you did that, if you sort of put that layer in front of people before you promoted them, I think we'd see different structures and organizations, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, you know, Bob or Susie's been with us 25 years, they're exceptional, whatever, we should promote them. That's crazy. You should understand if the complexity of thinking is developed or if it needs to be trained, what needs to be supported, and so on. But it's complexity of thinking. The higher up you get in an organization, right? If you're a CEO or director or a coach that's coaching CEOs or whatever, the higher up you get, the more you deal with humans, the less you do the things of the business. And very few people understand how much training they need to understand the complexity of the human mind. They just, and I'm not saying everybody runs out and gets a psychology master's, but you have to acknowledge that you need to understand that what you're actually doing is managing the human mind of multiple people, managing multiple people.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to move to kind of the next pillar of the ACME model. It's called the cycle of results. And I think it's a pretty fascinating model, but I feel like it sounds easier than I imagine it is to implement. So can you talk about what this cycle of results is and what it takes to actually move from seeking change to getting these results?
So I'll do it as simply as I can, because you're right. It looks super simple, but it's actually, it's very practical. So what you're referring to, we have 7 mechanisms. So we talked a little bit about the first one, which is process of change. Cycle of results is the second one, and performance triad is the third. So they're the basic mechanisms of all performance. And the cycle of results basically says, even though you are taught that actions produce results, and don't get me wrong, actions precede results. So I'm not going to sit here and say you don't have to take any action, right? No, action's extremely important, but people will try to change their actions to get a different result. And what the cycle of results shows is that's not the genesis of results. The genesis of results is in the mind. So in the mind body, if you will, is where results have their genesis, but we can't, it's not tangible. So we think actions produce results. But the thing is, some people throw around the word mindset. That'll be sufficient. So if your mindset is inappropriate, then your choices for actions are limited, and then your results are dictated by those actions. So what we talk about is that, ultimately your mindset, your thoughts, they become your results. And of course, it's a lot more complex than it sounds. But it is actually quite simple as well, which is if you don't change your mind, then you're constrained to the same actions, and then you're going to get the same results. So in order to get truly different results, you have to change your mind. That's the very simple way. It's not about, oh, I don't agree with you. That's not what it's about. You can push water uphill. So you can change actions and get different results, but it's a ton of work. versus the ease that comes from changing where the genesis is, your mind, then the results will flow through because the choices for actions will be different, and then the results will be different. So the cycle is the important part.
How are you coaching, your coaches and your leaders to change their mind?
Well, that's the third mechanism, which is the performance triad. So it sort of starts out like, let's recognize you're in the change business. So if you're a leader or a coach, your job is to help people change. Okay, here's the process of change. Now let's talk about, let's put it on the table. Results don't actually just come from better actions, which a lot of leaders, a lot of coaches, they have templates, they have actions, and then they get frustrated. Well, why isn't my template working? Why, it's a bad client, it's a bad employee. No, there's something missing in the execution of that tool. And so the performance, that cycle of results says, acknowledge that you need a specific mindset so that that tool is accepted, or it's an obvious choice. Then we go into the mind and say, well, what are the important things? And the performance triad tries to keep it to 3 things that are really important. People have got to focus on what they want. They've got to be in a positive emotional state, and they've got to be in a physiology of power. Then the choices for behavior will dictate the actions they take, which will bring better results. So often, and I'll tell you the key is focus. Most people pretend to focus on what they want when they're not really focused on what they want. And that's a humdinger. I do a bit of a demonstration in a live training classroom. You can use positive sounding words because that's all the rage. You can have goals that sound amazing, but if the focus of the goal is actually away from what you don't want, if the genesis of that sentence, that word is away from, here's an example. So a lot of people in business, they have goals towards profit, towards money, towards something financial. So let's say our goal is to do a plus 10% this quarter of profit, whatever. Okay. That sounds great. On the surface, you'd be like, yeah. But if the real genesis is, if we don't do plus 10%, we're dead. So if the real genesis is away from, going out of business, or away from bankruptcy, or away from not being able to pay the staff, if it's actually what they don't want, which is driving that goal, their focus is actually on what they don't want, even though their words are on, positive. And we teach people how to distinguish this. And the key is the emotional state of the body, right? Now, emotions tend not to be a conversation in a business world, but they're not that complicated. They're a guidance system. When the words you're saying and the programs, the habits, the comfort zones, if you will, the previous comfort zones that are running you are in alignment, you'll be in a positive emotional state. Take as many actions as you can in that day. But if your words are correct, it looks good, plus 10%, but you're in a negative emotional state, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, whatever, doesn't mean anything, like it doesn't mean you need counseling or something wrong with you or should repress it or any of that, although that may be the case. It means the patterns, the complexity within you can't handle getting the goal, and there's a disconnect, and you need to develop something. And so what I tell people is, if you're in a negative emotional state, stop what you're doing, because you're currently pushing water uphill, right? Just stop what you're doing. Handle the thing. Just handle it. And that could be changing your focus. It could be resolving a past issue. It could be, something as simple as shifting your physiology. But you have to handle it, because if you take action in a negative emotional state, what you're essentially doing is pulling yourself closer to what you don't want.
Yeah. So can you touch a little bit deeper on the physiology of power and what that means in terms of the triad?
Well, it's funny. I probably should have started this out by saying, don't believe everything I say here, because none of this is true. It's just all collected. So try it on. If it works, great. So physiology of power is essentially, is your physiology in its most powerful state, right? Now, people will be out there saying, you have to eat this, or don't eat this, or you have to do this, or don't do this. I don't know what that is for you. It's different for every person. But what I know is that right? So if green juice fires you up or whatever, if that's good for you or bad for you, what exercise is good or whatever. So make sure you're doing that. But sometimes your physiology is kind of run away with your focus and your negative emotions. And the fastest way to bring it back is to control your breathing, right? So breath plays a huge factor in bringing your physiology back into its intended optimum form. And one term that I like, it's just who I am, is a term called the state of coherence. And I like it because, as I mentioned, my undergrad is engineering, so I like to measure things. And you can measure the state of coherence. And the state of coherence is basically when your physiology, your heart, your brain, all the systems of the body are in sync versus out of sync. And a stress response, any sort of fight or flight or stress response would be when your body was out of sync. And so it's not a rocket scientist to know you're going to have a better chance at peak performance when you're in sync versus out of sync. Therefore, you're going to have a better chance at peak performance when you're in a state of coherence versus not coherence. And breathing, well, breathing's half of it, but breathing, the technique of breathing alone is the fastest way to get back there. And then when you layer in a practice of activating an emotion of gratitude, not thinking about being grateful, okay? Activating the emotion of gratitude with the breathing, you achieve a state of coherence within about 100 or so seconds. That's what the research says. So
I tried it yesterday in your course as I was going through it. And for those of you listening, when you have an opportunity, she walks you through this exercise. And I definitely felt it it was 100 seconds. So
but I must have distinguished thinking about being grateful, like, no,
I was putting myself in the grateful place. I was there. I was feeling it. I was emoting it. I'm sitting in my kitchen with a smile on my face,
right. And here's the thing. So is gratitude a positive emotion or a negative emotion?
It's positive.
So see, when you do that one exercise, you had to change your focus. What was it that you brought into your mind to activate that feeling? Was it a scene from your life or a memory?
It was a scene from my life. Yeah.
Right. So notice how what you did was you directed your focus towards this scene, okay, which was a scene in which you were grateful. You knew that. You revisited the scene, and in NLP, we call that anchoring. You revisited the scene that activated the feeling. So essentially in one exercise, what you did was you focused on what you want, you activated a positive emotion, and you did a breathing exercise. So what you did in that moment was put yourself in a peak performance triad. Any action you take from that state now, if you connect it to your goal, is going to be like rapid, like a shortcut. So it's a little secret technique.
Awesome. Thank you. So we only have about 2 minutes left. I want to make sure I ask you this last question, because I know when it comes to working with leaders and coaches, personally for you, you require two things to take on a client, and that's to have a burning desire and a willingness to do whatever it takes. And so I'm curious what those two things, the burning desire and the willingness, mean to you, and why you've come up with those requirements for clients.
Short and sweet, you need two things to change anything. You have to want it. It can't be something your partner wants. You have to want it. And you have to be willing to give it what it takes. Now, most people will say, Alex, I had a goal. I gave it everything I had, and I fell flat on my face. And I say that wasn't everything you had. That was everything you thought you had based on the previous comfort zone. Giving it what it takes means digging deeper. There's always a deeper level. And that's why Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. So what I know is when I take a private client, I screen for burning desire, which is like, foaming at the mouth, and a real coachability, the willingness to do whatever it takes to get there and not give up, sort of fall down 7 times, get up 8. If you have that as your base operational level, you will achieve. Now, I didn't say tomorrow. It might take next week, next month, whatever. But what I know for sure is and Churchill also said, never, ever give up. If you want it badly and you never give up, you will achieve it, right? Coaches, experts, leaders, people who have templates, they make it faster, but you will achieve it if you get up every time you fall.
Awesome. Well, Gina, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the community for joining us as well. As I mentioned, Gina's course will be live in the platform for the Edge members probably early next week. Hopefully, we're going through final revisions, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you spend the hour and a half and go through it, because I think it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you're providing the world with your insights, Gina. But it was a transformational time spent for me in the course. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I just, the real name of the game is, I want to be clear because there's a lot of people like me on the planet. Everybody who's watching this, you're going to get where you're going. People like Alex, people like me, people like the thought leaders, we just help you get there faster and with less effort. That's the name of the game.
Scaling up with less drama. That's the thing.
Right?
Awesome. All right, Gina, thank you so much. Thank you to the community. We'll see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.